Right, Liz, well, I think it was October or something like that last year. I was riding my saddle horse. People who know me would know Dobbin. Dobbin was a 17-hand Clydesdale cross, a big horse, very big horse. He's always given me an issue when I went to get on him. And I always said if I was on him a minute later that the rest of the day would be great, because he was a great horse to ride, but just very touchy to get in the saddle. And he'd been trying for 14 years to dump me, and eventually he got me in the backyard and broke a half a dozen ribs, a couple of them in multiple places. And yeah, at my age I didn't bounce. So that was a time of reflection as to what I was going to do with the rest of the time with the horses.
Rob, you've been riding for a lot of years. Tell us where your story started with horses and what some of your earlier memories are.
Yeah, well, as a child I always wanted a horse, and Mum and Dad sort of put that off. The story was you can't have a horse till we get time to build a stable, and they never ever built a stable. So I had opportunities on family holidays, that sort of thing, occasionally to ride a horse, and obviously loved it because I never lost that desire to ride a horse, but never really had the opportunity. And until I was nearly 30 years of age, I suppose, and had a bit of a life crisis with some health issues and family issues, and set myself a couple of goals, things I'd always wanted to do, to ride a horse and to play a saxophone. And I set out to do that, and yeah, that story started from there.
Rob, you say you remember asking to learn to ride and pleading for a pony as a boy, but you couldn't quite twist the arm of your parents. However, there was a pretty interesting family history involving horses, and when you started to learn a bit more about that, what were you able to find?
Yeah, Dad's family farmed at a place called Booberowry up near Burra in the mid-north of South Australia, and all the farming was done with horse teams. And from stories I was told, particularly the older boys in the family, I think there was 5 boys in the family, the older boys were driving teams from when they were 12, 13 years old, teams of 6, 8 horses. Not so much my father. He had health problems as a teenager, but he was certainly around the horses and did drive the teams. He tells a story of his older brother at, I think around that 12 or 13, being sent to Burra with a full team, 8 horses, to get a load of super from the railhead, and the people at the railhead would load the wagon and he'd have to drive it home. He'd come home through a creek. That was apparently quite a challenge to get a team down through Dead Man's Gully, I think it was called. And on this occasion, something had gone wrong at the railhead, and Uncle George didn't get home till well after dark. Mother was very worried that his father refused to go out and look for him. No, he's been sent to do a job, he will finish the job. But apparently the old chap did weaken and go out and help him unharness the team when he eventually got home. But so yeah, it was a pretty tough upbringing. I think they'd carted a lot of wood. Did quite a bit of dam sinking, a bit of contractor work and that sort of thing. Dad was a fair age when I was born. He was late to marry, and I was born before TV, so we'd sit around the fire at night, and as a bit of an excuse, I think, to be allowed to stay up that extra 10 minutes, you'd ask Dad, tell me about the horses, and we'd get some of these stories. And it wasn't till fairly recently we discovered some photos of some of the work they did with the wool wagons and carting the wood, huge loads of wood, which would have had to been pulled up onto the wagons with the horses and then unloaded with the horses. It's funny, I always assumed that they had teams of Clydesdales, and it wasn't until my wife found the photos that we realised they weren't Clydesdales. A lot of them were Percher and Crosses, or what would probably be called today Australian Drafts, a crossbred type of horse. But yeah, so you sort of sit back and now and think, what a mine of information there would have been there, and mine of knowledge if I could have tapped into it. But just the timing was wrong. A lot of people that have my sort of passion for horses, and that always claim that we were born a generation too late. It's just so hard to find those people with that knowledge and experience today. There's still a few around, but
In the days when your family were using horses for work and for transport, horses were used every day. But today, horses are mostly used for competitions and leisure. So can you still find pockets of knowledge and know-how to learn those more traditional working skills?
It's there. You've got to go out and look and I think be open-minded to learn from the people who've got the knowledge. When I was living at Strathalbyn, the children had ponies, and like small kids, it's often hard to get the work into ponies to keep them in manageable frame of mind. And there was an old chap there who was a friend of the family who was the last man in that district to what did he claim? He was the last man to breed and drive and work a team. And he would break my ponies, or the children's ponies, in and drive them in pairs or singles and teach me to drive them and that sort of thing. So that was the start of it, just with the kids' ponies. But as you start to do things and look around, you find people that have got that knowledge, and most of them are willing to help. Locally, Andrew Diverson across the border in Victoria, he's worked with horses all his life, and he's only too willing to share his knowledge, and you can always give him a ring. And another chap I use a lot is a fellow called Robert Edwards. People might know him as Porky Edwards. Robert drives the carriage in at the Swan Hill Museum nowadays, but he's helped me a lot, and he's come down and taught me to drive a team of four and got me started when I started with the pairs. And I hear from Robert every couple of days. He rings up to see what I'm doing, how I'm going. So the people are out there. You've got to seek them out still, and as I say, if you're prepared to listen and work with them, they'll help you.
Were they also driven for sport and for leisure and competition, or was it pretty well just mostly work that your family were involved with these teams of horses back in the day?
The teams were very much a work thing, although I believe my grandfather was very much into the picnic race thing. He had some fairly slow race horses, according to Dad, but no, so the horses were involved in their sport, but not so much the working horses. Yeah.
The sport of carriage driving is one that's had a pretty fascinating history, and Anglophiles may even bring to mind the late Duke of Edinburgh, who was a very fervent carriage driver, even into his 90s. What do we know about the sport, though, here in Australia? Is it strong here as it is in the UK?
Very much so. It was, hopefully people have heard of Boyd Excel, who's multiple world champion, and it doesn't get anywhere near the credits he should do for what he's achieved in carriage driving. And I've never got involved in it, but I do sit and marvel at the skill of somebody like that.
You say that you eventually got to learning to ride by the age of 30. Can you take us back to that time, Rob, and what had sort of happened in life to get you to that point where you thought, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it now. And of course, you certainly did. You've got on and lived a life with horses.
Yeah, well, as I said, I had a health problem. I had cancer. Got through that and got a clean bill of health. And then we had some family issues as well. And it was just a time to stop and think. Well, you can't keep putting things off. I must have spoken to a couple of people about it, that's what I wanted to do, and a chap that used to come to our dairy to buy milk from us. I've got an old horse in the paddock. You're more than welcome, come and get him. So I did, and it turned out to be an Appaloosa stallion, as skinny as anything. You could hang your hat on any rib you like to pick. And anyway, we saddled this horse up and rode the thing 5 or 6 miles, maybe 8 kilometres home. and no experience riding a horse, but yeah, silly enough to do it. And I think the thing was that poor and that starved that it didn't give me a problem. Got it home, fed it up for I don't remember now, a week or 10 days or so, and rode it every day, and I was getting on fine until it started to get a little bit of energy, and eventually it dropped me 3 times in one day, and I thought, blow this horse riding. I took the horse back, and wasn't long before somebody else who knew about it said, oh no, you just got the wrong horse, and they took me for a ride on one of their horses, and that could have ended in disaster. It was an old chap that was a huntsman up there, and he had a couple of hunters, and we rode out quite a distance down into a fairly steep creek, and he said, we'll turn around and head for home here. So as we turned around, I could hear him saying something else, but it was too late. The horse was full gallop up the hill, and when he caught me, I was still on the top. When we got to the top of the hill, he said, I was just going to tell you that I always gallop up this hill. But anyway, that sort of got me hooked, and we found a little coloured horse that seemed suitable. He was nothing fancy, but he was quiet and he was good enough for a learner. And I had this ambition for a long time that I wanted to learn to hunt, and wasn't satisfied with just riding. I had to learn to hunt, so I found an instructor, a little place called Cullington Indoor Arena, and I'd load this horse up on our farm truck. We didn't have a float or anything. And go over there once a week and get these lessons, and I think it was 12 or 15 months later I was out in the hunt field on this little coloured horse. So yeah, that was the start of it. So.
And for anyone who may have a vision of hunting with, often red jackets, and it looks beautiful, it's a real picture, but there's a reason why you usually have a whiskey or a slow gin at the start of it, isn't there, Rob?
Yes, yeah, we didn't hunt foxes or didn't hunt with foxhounds. It was more of a cross-country ride, I guess, over jumps. And you'd often ride 20, 25 kilometres in a hunt on a day. And yeah, it would get the adrenaline going. In those days we could have a field of 50 or 60 horses turn out. It wasn't flat gallop, but it was at a good, what they call a hand gallop, I suppose, and jumps coming up here and there as you went. Usually up in the hills they were over capped fences, so rails on top of the fences, and yeah, it was quite exhilarating, yeah.
And it's had such a history in South Australia as well. I think a really marvellous history that we should perhaps look more into, because those hunts, the Murray Bridge Club, Strathalbyn, Adelaide Hunt Club, and of course down here in the southeast. Did you hunt down here in the southeast in those sort of earlier days, or was it not till later in life that you moved down here?
Yeah, I didn't get to hunt down here until we moved here in, I think that was 96. But I did hunt with most clubs in South Australia at various times, and the Adelaide Hunt Club is the oldest sporting club in South Australia, and I believe it's on its last legs, that this could be its final year. So that's a bit sad to see an institution like that go by the wayside. But yeah, we shifted to the southeast in 1996, and one of my first port of calls was to see Lionel Moore, the butcher at Penola. People had told me he was the man to go and see, and that started many years of friendship with Lionel. Did a lot of riding, hunting, trail riding, polo cross, and yeah, we had a great friendship, and it was very sad to lose Lionel to cancer, and another case of all that knowledge that's lost way before it should have been.
Tell us a bit about how you got started with driving horses and carriage driving.
Yeah, that, as I said, we drove ponies years ago, but that was, didn't do a lot of it, just got started. And then years later we were doing the trail rides. We used to spend time on raising money for charity. A couple of times a year we'd do an 8-day trail ride somewhere. And in the talk around the campfire, as happens on these things, you sit around a campfire with a bottle of port and there's a lot of rubbish spoken, and somebody told me about a chap who used to trail ride, and he'd turn up at the trail ride with a pack rack on his car with all his horse gear on top of the car. He'd unload that, take the pack rack off, turn that upside down and put 4 legs under it, and that was his table. And then when he wanted some firewood or to cart some water, he'd turn that upside down, harness his horse up, and there'd be a sled, and he'd cart that. I had a Clydesdale mare called Rosie, and we used to use her as a pack horse on the rides. And somebody said to me, you should get a sled and do that. And the next ride we did, this chap turned up with a sled. So there was a well-known horseman from the southeast, Colin Byron, was on the ride. And I said to Colin, oh, when the ride's over, take the mare and break her into harness for me. And he sort of looked at me and said, oh, why don't we do it now? We borrowed some harness from people and harnessed this horse into the sled, and Colin jumped on it and down the pine break he went. And 10 minutes later he come back and threw me the reins and said, she's all yours, she's done. So I drove her a bit and did a bit more research and found out she had been broken into harness ages ago. So that was the start. I thought, well, we better get a cart and drive her a bit. And got hooked on doing that. So.
Does being a good horse rider translate to being a good carriage driver? What sort of skills are transferable, and what do you need to pick up?
I think just having horse knowledge is probably more important than the riding skills. If you've been around horses and you've got a feel for the horses, with the harness work with driving, you need to probably be one step ahead of the horse a little bit more than you do actually while you're riding it, because you've got 15 feet of rein or whatever, you've got a bit of a time delay. If you're caught by the horse, your thought pattern is too far behind it, you're going to be left behind very quickly. So, but yeah, it's a different feel. You have a much heavier feel in the rein than you do when you're riding, but a lot of it is translatable in terms of just understanding your horse and having that relationship with your horse.
And tell us about the horses as well. We took a little walk before and looked at some of your current team and the horses that you've got on the property, and I know you're off to Melbourne as well to bring one back. What kind of horses have you looked for over the years, and have you found in terms of temperament and conformation and things that really work well for the types of carriage driving that you do these days?
Yeah, I started with Rosie. She was a purebred Clydesdale, and she was really good to learn. Clydesdales are a little bit slower in their reactions and actions, and give you time to think and work out what you're going to do. Bred to just plod along, not to go anywhere in a particular hurry. Bred to pull rather than speed. When I decided I wanted to drive a pair, I looked around and there was some Percheron cross horses being sold up at horse sales at Echuca. So we went up for a look, and the people who owned them demonstrated them, and they drove them. They'd have been pairs and singles and fours, and I picked out the horse I wanted and bought that. And come home, and sort of lack of knowledge a little bit, what I hadn't taken into account was the Percheron breed has a much freer movement about it. It wants to travel, it wants to get up and go. So I drove them for a little while and then sort of worked out that it wasn't fair on Rosie. She was being asked to go a lot faster than she was comfortable with. So another one of these Percherons that had been through the sale come back on the market. So I ended up buying that. And for the carriage work and that, they're ideal because they like to move and like to get going. But if you're doing a wedding or a funeral, they don't want to just stand around. They like to work if they can. And then there was the issue with if we committed to do a wedding, and as it can happen with a horse, you come out in the morning to go and do your wedding and you've got a lame horse for no known reason. So that was a good excuse to buy another pair of horses just to be on the safe side. So we bought a pair of Clydie crosses. That's what we call our chocolate team, Tony and Peggy, well known around the place now. They came out of Melbourne. They were experienced in the carriage trade in Melbourne, and that was an attraction to me because the more experience the horse has got, the better it is for the driver as far as if you're still learning and still feeling your way with these things. And so they taught me a lot, and they're excellent for doing the type of work we do. And being a crossbred Clydesdale, they still have got that little bit of go in them. They can cover the distance and they'll trot along quite comfortably at 10k an hour, I suppose. But I do like the Clydesdales. I've got a pair of Clydesdale mares here, which we use selectively. We just pick the jobs that we want to do with those, and the one I've got in Melbourne is a foal of one of these mares, and just 2.5-year-old, and that's been broken in by Shane Patterson in Melbourne, so very much exposed to the traffic, and it's working alongside the trams and down through the busy streets of Melbourne, so I'm quite excited to go and have a drive with him tomorrow and see what he's done with him and get him back. He'll be a while before we can use him commercially, because you might say he's over there doing his primary school training and he's still got a long way to go before he's graduated yet. So, but that'll be a work in progress. So. But yeah, so my crossbred Clydesdales or the Percheron crosses are the good boned horses. Are strong, and the temperament seems to be right for the type of work we do. They love people. They love getting out and getting the pats and
And how often do they get worked, Rob? What's the week look like for you?
The last few weeks have been very slow with this weather. I'm a bit of a fair weather rider nowadays, but if we've got jobs on, we're working those teams at least once, usually twice a week prior to the job. Keeps them in the right frame of mind, but it also keeps their fitness up, and they love to work. You take one pair out, you can nearly guarantee the other pair will be sitting at the gate watching, wondering why isn't it my turn. So, but yeah, so we a couple of times a week, or it's a lot of work to keep multiple horses in work, but you wouldn't do it if you didn't enjoy it. So, yeah.
Tell us a bit about carriage driving these days and where you do it and what you do. I mean, I remember growing up as a kid and we would ride horses all around the place, lots of dirt roads back then, and cars always knew to pull over a bit, and there was always a good level of etiquette between horse rider and motorist. But has that changed, and where do you take your horses these days, and do you have to avoid certain areas as well?
Yeah, well, where we live at Malel, we're 5 minutes down the road from the Malel cheese factory. We've only got a small property, so our only option is to drive out on the roads. So we can nearly guarantee every time we drive out the road we're going to run into a milk tanker. But they're very, very good. We've found them extremely courteous, and we're conscious of the fact that we're interrupting their day of slowing them down, but we try and give them access to pass, and they're very good. 90% of the motorists are good. We do get a few that are quite ignorant as far as I'm concerned. They don't understand that a horse can move sideways just as quickly as it can move forward, and that it may not be something they do. It could be a fox or anything jump out in the bushes, a kangaroo, whatever, and all of a sudden you jump sideways. So we do ask that people keep that in mind and just ease up a little bit and come past. I guess one of the concerns is people get used to our horses out there. They know our horses are pretty good, and they don't take into a fact that unexpected thing that can happen. So it is a risk, but no, these horses are very good in the traffic with the trucks and farm machinery and whatever we encountered. We've encountered people driving stock on the road and had to walk through them, and it's all part of the experience, I guess. But we do take them into Mount Gambier from time to time, and they trot down the main street and get lots of waves and lots of attention, and we reckon the horses can read the traffic lights. They seem to be able to understand. I don't know whether they see the colours or just know that when that top light's on they're going to have to stop. But yeah, we work our horses mainly to voice, so their direction and their speed and everything's pretty much controlled by voice command. So it makes it fairly easy driving in the traffic. So.
We Which makes it all the more amazing, really, doesn't it? Because they are enormous animals, as you say, some of them up to 17 hands or so. And, I don't know what they'd weigh, but maybe around a tonne or just under. And, to have that kind of relationship with them is really quite amazing, but it must be hugely satisfying.
Yeah, it is a particular pleasure to be able to work them and to have that confidence that they're going to do what you ask them. When I had my fall and broke my ribs, we had a number of jobs lined up. It was sort of leading into the Christmas period, and people didn't want us to cancel. We spoke to a few people about cancelling, and we really want you to come. So my 3 girls stepped up. They were all very competent horse riders, but hadn't done very little driving. But we put them in the driver's seat, and as long as I could crawl in alongside them and the horses could hear my voice, we were still able to do the jobs. And it took a week or two, but it didn't take that long really for the horses learnt that the girls were in charge and they would listen to their voice just as much as they would listen to mine. So, yeah, they're pretty intelligent animals.
Some years ago, I was interviewing the owner of a famous Clydesdale stud in Echuca, and they'd often have visits from the local nursing home. And she'd bring the horses into a yard and the residents would sort of spend time with them. And he made the remark to me that some of those visitors had quite advanced Alzheimer's, even to the point of being non-verbal. But he recalled one gentleman who, upon being around the Clydesdales, just illuminated and started talking and remembering about his childhood and his early life spent with working horses.
Yes, we get a few out. Quite happy to have them come out, but we haven't had a lot. But none perhaps to that extent, but the ones that do come out, you can certainly see the joy in their faces. We did have a group of, I think they're probably autism-type youngsters come out. I want to say youngsters, some of them were in their early 20s and that. And one young chap that came out, I was quite concerned when he hopped out of the car. He was very vocal and quite angry. You could see the anger in him, and he was stomping around the yard here, and I don't know how this is going to go. And when the carer got him to come over to the stable to meet the horses, he came over in a very aggressive fashion, and I was starting to step forward a little bit worried for my horses. And as he stepped up to the horse and put his hand on the horse, you could just see all the anger go out of him. And he spent probably best part of an hour here just patting the horses and just with his face up against them, and it was just beautiful to watch. Yeah. So yeah, it does have a very soothing effect, I think, on people. And we get quite a few of the elderly that love to come on our carriage rides. We've got one gentleman who's in his 90s. He did a ride with me out to Glencoe. We took a carriage out to the Glencoe wool shed and changed the horses out there and brought them back again, and he did the full ride, and then he's been back twice since, including a stagecoach ride, and he loves it. He did a coach ride with us from Penola out to Yallum Park and went through the Yallum Park homestead. And very disappointed we couldn't get him up onto the driver's seat on the stagecoach because it is quite a challenge to get up there, but yeah, so we've had a number of 90-year-olds that really love the opportunity to get behind the horses and see the horses work and just relive their childhood. And we had a German couple from Adelaide ring me, and they were coming to Mount Gambier with their family to spend a week to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. And they married in Germany, and the bride's father had offered her a horse and carriage for a wedding. She'd declined the offer, decided it was too much money or whatever, and she'd regretted it ever since, and she wanted a horse and carriage ride. So we were going away the weekend of their wedding anniversary, but I thought, if you can get here a few days earlier, and then that suited them. I offered to pick her up and take her around town, and no, I want to go out into the forest. So we put them on our carriage, and they had their family with them. I think there was 8 of them come out and took them out into the forest, and we surprised them with a morning tea out there. They hadn't organised that, but we put on a morning tea out in the forest. And I think it was a real pleasure to be involved in something like that to help her fulfil her dreams, I guess. And it's, you get some really satisfying moments. The funerals are another one. We do the odd funeral, and it's always people who have had a lifetime with horses usually that look for that. And there are some special moments. It can be a little bit confronting when they come and ask you, tell you they've got a terminal illness and they want to organise their funeral, but it can be very rewarding at the same time.
Rob, you're a horseman for life, and I know, as you say, you had a bit of an altercation with Dobbin in October, but have you been back in the saddle since?
No, I haven't. I don't know whether my wife's probably going to hear this, but I still want to get back in the saddle. She's not keen for me to, but I think we will at some stage. We've got a couple of gypsy cob ponies here. They're a bit small for me, but that might be the first step to get back on one of those shortly, but it's finding time. Yeah.
Tell us about some of the horses that you've got currently, and the personalities and the plans for them.
Yeah, well, I guess the two that most people see are what we call our chocolates, our bay horses, Tony and Peggy. Peggy's quite a heavy set type of horse. She's the lazy horse of the pair, and then you've got Tony, who I think might have a little bit of trotter in him, and he's a worker. He'll work all day. He just loves to get up and go, and you often find that in the pairs, that our pair of greys, Mickey, he's a bit slower, and if he can slack off, he will. Whereas his mate Curly, she wants to work, and she'll work all day, and that. So you have to work with what you've got. So when we drive them in a four, we put the two that are real keen to work. Tony and Peggy go out. Tony and Curly go out the front, and the two ones that want to slack off a bit, they go back in the pole. And I actually find they've got to work harder doing that, but we can get at them there and just encourage them to keep working if we need to. So then we've got our Clydie mares, and they're a softer, kinder type of horse to work with. They've both got gypsy cob foals on them at the moment, so they'll be what commonly known as drum horses, a gypsy cob Clydie cross foal, and they'll probably be a dual purpose horse, a saddle horse and a carriage horse. So, yes, and Freddie, the one we're picking up from Melbourne, Freddie's a purebred Clydie. We bought Catherine from some friends who are Clydesdale breeders. Catherine's the mare, and they were a bit disappointed to sell her, but they had lost her foal the previous year and then tried to get her back in foal and had her scanned and was told no, she's not in foal. So they agreed to sell her to us. And she come home, and she hadn't done any work for a little while, and she got a bit fat, and so I took her out. I was riding Dobbin and leading her, and had some friends with me, and copped a lot of criticism about her weight, and she looks like she's pregnant. And I said, oh no, she's not pregnant, she's been scanned, she's not in foal, but she was. And so we got a bonus with a lovely purebred colt foal, so he'll come back in and join the team when he gets home. So, yeah.
There's a saying that Australia came to prosperity on the sheep's back, but perhaps that's not the whole story. I think there's a certain case to be made, isn't there, that Australia really was built through the work of horse and man, and some of the stories and photos that you have of your family's part in that history, you certainly speak to that.
Yes, the horse certainly played a huge role. I've seen a photo come up on Facebook just recently of a street in Melbourne, one of the busy streets in Melbourne back in the 1800s, and there probably would have been 40 various horse-drawn vehicles. And the person who posted the photo posed the question about the amount of support workers that had to go to support that industry. Everything from people picking up the manure in the street to the farriers, the saddle makers, people building and repairing the carts, the wheelwrights. It was just a huge number of people that were employed to keep the horse on the road and going. And like today, that's one of our biggest problems, is finding those sort of skills. To find farriers that will shoe the big horses is a real problem, and then to just the cost of it as well. We have to shoe our horses every 6 to 8 weeks. We hot shoe them the old-fashioned way. Their shoes are hardened, and that's probably a cost of somewhere between $150 and $200 per horse every 6 to 8 weeks. So those, along with the horse skills going, those sort of trade skills are disappearing too. People to repair the carriages if you need repairs done, or new wheels, that sort of thing. There's a very limited number of people in the country that can do that for us.
The photo of a little boy on top of a very large Clydesdale, just legs forward and perfect stockman's seat there, is something pretty special. Looking back, did you think this little boy would have such a future and career in horses that you've ended up having?
No, not at all. I wanted it in those days, but sort of as time moved on, it didn't look likely. That stable never ever got built, and it just didn't seem possible. But it certainly has been a life that I haven't regretted. You've met a lot of really good people through the horse industry, and people who I hunted with at Strathalbyn years ago. When we catch up, we still get on well, and it's a pleasure to go back to meet them and to participate in some of their activities. With the hunt clubs, I found it was a non-competitive type sport, which suited me. It was never one for real competition. It was people from all walks of life, and you were just out there to have a good day and to sort of try and get around safely. And after we shifted to Penola, another one of the little dreams that pop into the head, I wanted a pack of hounds, and I actually had it for a few years, had a pack of beagles that I took hunting, and that was another chapter that new skills you had to learn, and it was all good fun.
And you've shared a lot of your knowledge over the years as well with horse people from around the district and Pony Club and things like that as well, Rob. So you've kept passing forward that knowledge.
Well, you try to. You pass on what you can. I'm pretty lucky. I've got a couple of young people who come out on a voluntary basis to help when I'm working horses when they're available. And I've had even older ladies that have come and helped, and we get them driving, and they've enjoyed it. None of them have gone on with it, but I think they've had a good time while they've been here doing it. It's always better if you can share these things, share the fun and share the enjoyment. It's always happy to do that.
And just finish us up, Rob, with where can people get in touch with you, and where can they find you and see you out and about?
Well, just at the moment we're not doing a lot, but we've got a Facebook page, as everybody does, just Robs Carriages on Facebook. Next year marks the 100 years since the last Cobb & Co coach ran from a place called Eulaba through to Surat up in Queensland, and we've got some plans to celebrate that next year with the Cobb & Co coach. They're not far enough advanced to share yet, but that'll be exciting times, and we're looking at doing some more of the type of tourist work we do with our coach trips to Yallam Park and perhaps up through the Coonawarra region when the weather improves. So, they'll see us out and about, and love to have them come along and say hello.
Rob, thank you so much for sharing some of your history with us. It's so appreciated. It's been so enjoyable.
Thank you for inquiring. It's been a pleasure.